Okay, welcome to the very first of the Philosophy of Mind Intro to the Intro Backbone course. Let's add this to the stage. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about. Like we said in this intro book that we've been going through, we look at 8 different questions. One of them is the mind-body problem. So it's related to philosophy of mind, which of course we know why we're interested in that. We don't have to rehearse it again. But this is sort of the launching point for going into the full philosophy of mind course, which we'll then be doing after this. And this one will be recorded and added to the website, but also we're going to be doing extra long sessions on Monday and regular size sessions on Wednesday. And you and I are going to blast through the 9 or so essays plus the intro quite rapidly. And we'll probably cut this into multiple videos today so that it's not just all one, so it can go into the different sections of the website. So let's get started. We know from, excuse me, we know from our experience with this ridiculous but fun book that he's going to focus very narrowly on just one small section of the philosophy of mind, which is a very important question. It's an enduring question. It's a question that's alive today and that has clearly played a role in ancient philosophy, and lots of thinkers have had lots to say about it. It's called the mind-body problem. Let's move our, that might just work fine. What other options do we have? No, that's good. Okay, good. So we have the mind-body problem. Now, these are some of the camps. So before we do that, the mind-body problem, and we'll look a little bit at identity. We'll look a little bit at mortality and immortality and other things that are related. But mostly we're going to be focusing, even when we touch on those things, with essays that are focused on the mind-body problem. Now, what is the mind-body problem? The mind-body problem is this. The concept that we have in philosophy, one of the ways of understanding what we're doing is trying to clarify our concepts. If we clarify them well enough, we might invent a whole science or a whole set of sciences, right? Well, there's a lot of sciences right now trying to figure out things about the mind. There's neuroscience, there's AI, there's computer science, there's behavioral psychology, there's other types of psychology. There's, why am I drawing a blank? There's about a dozen or so, right? A dozen or so subjects that are trying to figure out this mind thing. Well, philosophy has been trying to figure it out for a long time. And one of the things that we hit upon was that our concepts of the mind, they have some issues that we need to sort out. See, what we think of when we think of bodies and what we think of when we think of minds are two entirely different concepts. At least they seem that way at first. So we might try to resolve this problem by altering our views of bodies or altering our views of mind or something like that. But the question boils down to something quite simple. It's, if things are radically, completely different from one another, how can you possibly conceptualize one of them having an effect on the other? That's basically what it boils down to. If the mind is not like the body, it doesn't have length, breadth, width, extension. We're not talking about brains here. We're talking about minds, right? And in philosophy, we understand that when we're saying mind, some monistic materialists might think, well, that's just the brain and the things the brain is doing. That's a small minority in philosophy. They've got some arguments to make, and they're very interesting. But typically, we use the word mind because there is for a number of reasons. One, there's a subjective quality to our experience and our existence, and it's not quite clear that what our minds do is reducible to matter. And what we're going to see in this introduction is that of all the camps and positions on this question, there's a surprisingly large number of them that have some view like that, and a very few that don't. So this mind thing is not length, breadth, width. It's not in a location exactly. It's not like it has inertia in a sense, like we have metaphorical ideas of building up pressure and tension and things like that. But the mind, that's like folk psychology. But the concept we have of mental experiences, mental actions, mental faculties is nothing like the concept we have of bodies, things that can be pushed around and can bump into each other. And so if we say, okay, I think there are two things, we would be dualists. Now, some people will try to solve this problem by being monists and saying it's all mind or it's all body. But most of the camps fall into some kind of dualistic interactionism. And if you start with dualism, which we're going to look at the other ones too. But if you start with dualism, the question boils down to, okay, well, if this is extremely different from this, not just extremely different, qualitatively completely different, there's nothing similar about them, then where's the point that they interact, right? Like I can see all these mental things affecting other mental things. And I can see that, first of all, I can see that the body does affect the mind. If you stick a needle in my body, I have a mental experience of pain, right? So clearly there's an interaction between the body and the mind. And also I can make a decision to get up and walk out of the room. And then something physical with my body has happened. And so there was a mental thing and then there was a physical thing. So if I think that they can affect each other in both directions, perhaps, then how? That's the question, how? It's not that the philosophers are saying, boy, I wonder if it would be possible to move a body with the mind or to, excuse me, or to affect a mental state through physical actions. It's not like they're wondering if that's possible. They're saying, how is it possible? How is it possible? Is our concept of mind wrong? Is our concept of body wrong? Is there some clever way that we can understand that the concepts are mostly correct or correct enough? And then can we figure out how they interact with each other? So there are various camps. Here's a small summation. There are dualistic interactionists. There's substance theorists and sorry, let me move this a little bit here. Okay. Bundle theorists. There's monists. Those are idealists or materialists. There's monistic idealists and monistic materialists. There's epiphenomenalists and qualiaists and parallelists, which are interesting, and panpsychists. And so what we normally do and what we're going to do today is what we always do, which is we're going to introduce the battlefield. We're going to say, hey, let's go climb a hill and look over this battlefield. Look at all these different armies and camps and how they're related to each other and what they're fighting and what kind of weapons are they using and do they think that the weapons of the other side are illegitimate, the arguments they're using. So let's get into it. The problem, the mind and body are two different, very different, completely different things, whatever things means like that. So how can the one affect the other and vice versa? Worded another way, are we one thing, two things, or three things, or what? And this is very related to Alana's interests here, right? So we can see that even if we're looking at a narrow question in the philosophy of mind, it's already touching on stuff that we're interested in. All right, for our purposes, we'll only consider two, mind and body. How can these two interact? Various camps. Well, let's look at dualistic interactionists. Big sets of tents, a huge area with a lot of different positions. Dualistic, of course, means two. We know this. I don't have to tell the Greeks what dualistic means, right? Dualistic interactionists, it's clear what it means. It means these are people who think there are two things. There's mind and there's body, and that the two interact with one another. The will is mental and it makes the body move. The senses are a part of the body. They create impressions upon the mind in the forms of sensations. We could cut them into two camps. The bundle theorists say, well, what you are is nothing but the sum total of your experiences plus your body, plus your capacities, habits, temperaments, and ideals, plus abstractions of experiences. Like the mental and the physical, they taken together, all of those things, they make you up. The substance theorists say you do have all those things, but there's something else that has them, right? It's sort of the idea, right? There's a you that has those things, or there's a mind out beyond just those events or inclinations or something. So let's look at these camps now. Monists, they're materialists. They would say we are one thing. We are bodies. Our mind is our brain, or it is something our brain does, but it is not a different thing making up what we are. Epiphenomenalists is one type, potentially, there's a way of interpreting it, of materialists. They say that the mental rides upon the physical as an incidental or artistic illusion or something. So basically, the materialists say, look, it's all body. And you're under an illusion when you think there's this other type of thing called mind. Maybe that's an illusion because the mind can't think about what it's doing, or we should say the brain can't think about what it's doing fully. And so it becomes this illusory, mystical thing or whatever. But all the things that you do mentally are identifiable with things that happen to you physically. And we can put you in an MRI machine and we can say, when you recognize grandma, this part of your face, of your brain lights up and la-di-da, right? So they're seeing the connection between the material and the mental. And they're saying maybe as an article of faith, or maybe there's some arguments that they have for it. We're going to be looking at essays from all these positions. They're going to say, all I affirm as existing is the material. It's all bodies. And one sometimes materialistic monistic view is the view of the epiphenomenalists. And the epiphenomenalists, which I think I wrote epiphenomenologists, I'm not sure why, but the epiphenomenalists say, okay, that mind thing, it is real, but it doesn't affect the body. The body is doing all the things. All the things are happening for material laws and material reasons and matter in motion. And the mental isn't coming in as a thing that affects things. It's like a whirlpool can travel down a river, and the river can have sticks floating in it, and we can be going through time materialistically and bumping into one another, and then also as we're flowing over rocks, there's noises. The mental, the things we call mind, those are sounds that are made by the river. They're not really anything but a quality of what the material river is doing, right? The material river and the material in the river, that's all that there is. It's just one of the things it does is it has this quality that's the thing we think of as mental or recognize as mental or that feels mental, but it's not actually a part of the causal nexus of things happening. All right. But you don't have to be an epiphenomenalist to be a materialist. A materialist could say something like, yeah, there's a lot of really impressive, fancy things that brain of yours is doing, but I can study neuroscience. I can put you in an MRI machine. I can describe everything that's happening whenever you report having any sort of a mental experience. And I deny that there's anything other than that. It's just those neurons, the way I'm mapping them out or trying to map them out and recording that. That's all there is to it. Idealists are another kind of monist. They say, yeah, well, we agree. We're only one thing, but that thing is not physical at all. It's mental. It's phenomenological. It's spiritual. They don't say all three of those. You could be saying any of those and be an example of an idealist, perhaps. The material, of course, you could say it's all spiritual and not be an idealist, but it's the Platonic ideal is the thing that's most real. And these are just like the epiphenomenalists in a sense, the physical world is like a shadow of what's really real. The material, oh, there we go. We wrote it right there. The material is a shadow of what is truly real. It is an illusion, or it is an approximation, or it is dependent upon something eternal which sustains it. It's secondary at least, and not. I think you can't really be a monistic idealist if you think that material can have any effect on, though it's just the photographic negative of the monistic idealists, right? If there is something mental, it's just sort of the babbling sound of the brook, but the brook is material. And for the idealists, it's no, the brook is mental, and the physical things that you're measuring, that's just sort of like a quality of the existence of the dream or whatever. Okay. Panpsychists, which sometimes are a form of monistic idealists, but often they're not. So we're not going to try to lump them in with just being here. There's a thin amount of overlap there. What they're saying is, look, I think there's one thing. Let's call it nature. It's physical and it's mental, because both of those sets of properties are just basic. They're basic properties of the one thing that is, like the natural, right? So they're still monistic, but they believe that maybe you could categorize the qualities of things and say, well, one of the qualities of objects is their length, breadth, and width. We call it their extension, or their location in relative to other objects, or their velocity, or their inertia, or their impenetrability, right? There's all these physical qualities of physical objects. And they say, yeah, and another one is their rudimentary psychic ingredients. We don't mean psychic like fortune telling. We just mean some basic kind of consciousness. Not that there's deep thoughts and self-reflection in every pebble, but that they're the rudimentary building blocks of that type of thing, which are of course more sophisticated in your mind, just like the neurological physical things are more sophisticated in your mind. They're built up of what is basically natural, right? When I mean basic, it's just in there as like the color of the thing, right? The color of the thing, the mental aspect is just sort of inherently in it. Now, We don't want to confuse panpsychists with idealists, but maybe we could have put them in a third category here, actually, and say there's a kind of panpsychist who's a monist, and we'll call them naturalists. What they say is, okay, everything that you think of as mental is real, and everything you think of as material is real, but they're just, the color of an object is different than its weight, which is just, those are just two different qualities of a physical object. And a third quality of the physical object is its vibrational. I don't want to be unfair to them. I certainly don't want to be unfair to them, but it is some sort of a patternistic mental. It has to be mental. There, some kind of a mental wave or something like that is inherently a part of just being stuff, right? So we could maybe, I'll adjust the slide and put that as a third option. So it's sort of saying the material and the mental are both just qualities of the natural, and we'll call nature is all there is. So it would still make you a monist. Okay, then, so the material monist, they say this is what makes you up, your body and your brain. Okay, and your brain is a part of your body. It's not outside your body. It's not above your body. It's not disconnected from your body. And if you're looking for anything mind-like, if you're looking for anything mental, it's stuff your brain is, or it's stuff your brain is doing. This is what you are. You are a body. I am a monistic materialist. The mind is somewhere in there. If you want to call it mind, fine. Some of the fancy things the brain does, perhaps. But if there's a third thing that's called mind that's different than brain, it's just physical. It's a part of the body, and all there are bodies. All there is body. The dualistic interactionists are saying, well, we know you got two things, okay? You got a brain for sure, but that's of course a part of your body, but you also have a mind, and a mind is a very different thing from a body. Minds, uh, minds don't have position. Minds don't have momentum. Minds don't have colors. Like, they can see colors, they perceive them, but they're like, if you think about justice, it doesn't have a color, your thought, right? And maybe neurologically something physical is happening in your brain when you're thinking about something mentally, but the mind events and the mind substances, or the mind, there's lots of different dualistic interactionists, but whatever it is that is mental is just completely different from the body, but they interact somehow, and maybe they interact through the brain. Maybe the brain somehow helps to trigger, kick off, generate mental events. Maybe the mind can contemplate and will and send things back. Like, you can have torment in the brain to mediate and meditate over something and decide what the right thing to do is, just like the brain can then tell the body what to do, and the body can stub its toe and send a message to the brain, right? So the brain is, maybe it's all physical, but there's definitely something that's not physical involved here. It's called the mind. So the body and the mind, somehow they're interacting with each other. So dualistic interactionists could be like that first drawing, or they could be like the second drawing here, which is, all right, we said you had the body and the brain. Let's say the brain is totally physical. It's just a part of the body, but you also have something else, and you are something else. And what you are is mental and is mind. And the mind and the body, with these two arrows, we're showing they interact with each other somehow. And that's the question. How is it that they interact with each other? Okay, like we said before, the epiphenomenalists have an idea. Their idea is that the body and the brain, they interact with each other because they're both probably physical. The brain can do things to the body can do things to the brain, but all of that's physical and it goes in both directions. But then riding on top of that is this thing called the mind. And notice the arrow only goes up. So the things the body is doing in these bottom two shapes, they're making mental things happen. But those mental things are like the sound and the spray of the river. They're just sort of they're just the cream in the Campari, the gin in the coffee. Like, they're the icing on the cake, right? They're not really real. They don't affect anything, but isn't it nice that they're just sort of floating over there as a thing that's happening? There's a quality to being, and that quality has no causal effect on anything. And the arrow doesn't go down from the mind. The brain is where you'd have to see, and that's all physical. The brain is the thing that's making decisions. The brain is the thing that's affecting the body, because the brain is a body. And so we don't have to worry about how it can affect the body, because bodies can affect bodies. That's easy enough. If you want to figure out the details, go study some science that we'll make possible by thinking about these concepts so clearly that those sciences can exist. But the epiphenomenalists are going to say, but that mental stuff, the quality of why it's like something to see green, like it's not just I'm a Terminator and I'm seeing 336 wavelength of electromagnetic radiation coming from that direction. It's like, no, there's a quality to it. That mental quality, that's just nice. That's just sugar in the coffee. It's not real in the sense that it has a causal effect on anything, but it's real in the sense that you can value it. And it's nice that this physical stuff is translatable and understandable in that way, or something like that. Okay, now we get to an interesting group of people, because this is, by looking at all these camps, we're going to see, of all the battlefields we've looked at the determinism free will issue, we've looked at the existence of God, we're going through the ethics intro right now on subjective versus objective moral judgments. At the same time, we're starting to look at this mind-body problem. And by looking at all these camps, I would say this is the field with the most chaos in it, right? The battle lines in determinism versus free will, they're really well drawn. And the disagreements about how to draw the battle lines are very few, even between the camps. They agree mostly quite a lot. Here, we're going to have so many different views on how this works that's going to give us an excitement, I think, for getting into this topic, because there's clearly something to figure out here, right? If you can go and find essay after essay after essay from radically different perspectives to try to solve this problem, it's like, well, this is a real problem. We're going to look at some pseudo problemists here who are going to say the whole thing is not a real problem, which is, of course, we argue everything in philosophy. That's certainly a camp. But thinker after thinker, the most serious thinkers in the history of Western thought, have come together to say, holy crap, maybe our idea of bodies are wrong, or maybe our idea of mind is wrong. But if they're really this different, we can't understand how they're interacting with each other. So one of the type of parallelists are occasionalists. And believe it or not, and we're going to look at some of this view. This is the Mellenbranche view, which is that the body is doing stuff and to affect the mind, and the mind is doing stuff to affect the body. But there's no way in hell that that's possible. There's no way that you can have something that qualitatively different, radically, completely different, that could actually have an effect, right? I know how a domino can hit a domino, but I don't know how a domino can hit a spirit, and then the spirit can hit the next domino. Like that, the concept doesn't work. And there are thinkers who said, I see clearly that the concept doesn't work. Therefore, constant miracles. You make a decision to pick up the pencil, in this case, the lighter, to pick up the lighter, and then your arm reaches and picks it up. You know why? God performs a miracle. Every single time your mind makes a decision for your body to do something, God comes in and allows the miracle that would allow the body to reflect what the mind is doing. And every time you stub your toe and a message through body physical things gets to your brain, and then you have a pain experience, which is mental, which is a very different quality than those neurons bumping into each other kind of a thing. That mental thing that happens is only happening because God is performing a miracle, so that there's a rationality and a reasonableness between these two parallel universes. It's like we're living in a parallel universe. The parallelists are going to say we're living in two universes at the same time. There's a way of describing everything mentally, and there's a way of describing everything physically. There are physical events and there are mental events, and they're affecting each other. And the way we explain that, if you're Mellenbranche, is you say miracle, 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 miracle. In fact, Mellenbranche was so serious about thinking about the concepts of bodies as length, breadth, and width and extension that he thought miracles happened every time oops, let me add you back in there. Sorry. he thought miracles happened because he's a rationalist, so he wants to say, "Well, what's the quality of this idea and what's entailed by that?" He said, well, bodies are just length, breadth, width. They're just extension. They don't have the ability to induce motion in one another. So when a billiard ball strikes a cue ball, strikes a pool ball, and it bounces off at an angle, conserving the momentum between the two bodies, a miracle has happened. Every time a domino hits another domino, God performs a miracle to allow nature to look as though it's ordered rationally and reasonably, because otherwise it would be utter chaos. But for Malebranche, it's miracle after miracle after miracle, constantly sustaining every aspect of being. And the way he got there was not a prior commitment to that, because most theologians and theists and stuff don't want to say anything like that. The reason he got there was because he had a commitment to rationality. And he was looking at the ideas, and he says it doesn't make sense that something so different from bodies could affect it. In fact, it doesn't even make sense that bodies can make motion happen in other bodies. So that's one type of parallelism. Here's a very different kind of parallelism. Very, 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 very different from that. Here's a parallelism that just simply says everything that happens is happening in both the worlds. If you stub your toe, there's a physical thing that happens. A neuron bumps into another neuron, a synapse gets triggered, messages get sent. All of those things happen to the body world. And a pain experience happens in the mental world, and an anguish and a memory of other pains, and oh, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I did that. And then a message to curse so that you can relieve some of the pain, perhaps. All of the mental dominoes are happening, and all of the physical dominoes are happening, and they parallel each other. It's like God gave us two worlds, right? And he's such a superfluous creator. He didn't just make one world, he made two, and they always work in parallel somehow. Here's a very interesting kind of parallelist perspective, which is saying, no, there's only one world. It's just like this curved line here. And if you look at it from one perspective, it looks concave. And if you look at it from the other perspective, it looks convex. All of the physical things and all of the mental things are happening together because they're really the same thing. It's just one world. It's just, if you look at it from this perspective, you see all the mental part. And if you maybe by considering the subjective, and if you look at it by objectifying everything, you can describe the exact same events in the exact same world in the physical terminology. So these are three very, very, very different kinds of parallelism, but they're all parallelism. Why? They're trying to account for the mystery of how bodies could affect minds or minds could affect bodies. Universal parallelists and panpsychists. We already talked about this, so I won't say it again. There's two. So let's just look at this for a quick second. What if so this is, again, I should have just called this a monist, and I'll upgrade the slides for next time, because I really think that on my new inspection of this is a different kind of monism. But it's a strange kind of monism because it incorporates and synthesizes and it encapsulates or attempts to both the mental and the physical by saying those are both natural. I don't believe in a physical material world. I don't believe in a spiritual mental world. I believe in a natural world. And a natural world is the kind of world that has naturally mental things and naturally physical things, right? So the rock has length, breadth, width, color, extension, impenetrability, a density, and inertia. Wonderful. It also has some rudimentary form of consciousness. It's not thinking thoughts. It's not anguishing. It's not saying, am I a good rock today? It doesn't have propositions. It's not, but it has some sort of feeling. Maybe that's part of how it's communicating its impenetrability, maybe those forces that we like to call them, which we don't understand, by the way. I don't know. Lots of different ways of being a panpsychist. But there's some element of the mental in everything, right? Pan means all, and psyche is the psyche. So the psyche is in all, but it doesn't mean that all is just mind. It's not being an idealist. It's just saying that's how we can account for how bodies are the kinds of things that can do mental things, because the natural, if instead of calling it the material, we call it the natural, it has material qualities and it has mental qualities. So that's over on the left here. And then the qualias are a very interesting scientific. So this is like an I keep wanting to put the G at the end. Epiphenomenal kind of an approach. We've got that old picture of the body and the brain. And the brain is now this time half inside the square of the body, but the other half is sort of floating above. And it's kind of like, okay, maybe the things the brain does to affect the body are all in the physical part of the brain, but the mind is at least the quality of things. Like when I said, why is it like something to see green? And maybe that's sort of floating on top. Maybe it can have a causal effect, right? Maybe so we're going to see a lot of different camps. Some are going to say no way it can have a causal effect. Those are the epiphenomenalists, right? They say it doesn't have a causal effect, it just floats on top. But there are qualiaists who say, look, are you telling me that people don't make decisions to fly to another country to see a painting because of the quality of the painting? And that doesn't have an effect on the emotions and the brain instantiations of those things. And history all happened without the qualities of the thoughts. Those were just added in afterwards, right? So we're going to see some arguments on both sides of those debates there. All right. Well, I guess we'll end with idealist monists, since we started with monistic materialists. These are people who say it's all mind. Body is nothing but a conception of the mind. It's something the mind is doing. It's just the exact photographic negative of the people who are saying the body is all there is and the mind is something the body is doing. Okay. Then when we went through this last time, one of the students came up with another idea. And he said, okay, what if, so we named it after him, Savadian channeling. The idea is that the body is down here in a physical sense, but the mind is sort of floating up high, but the brain, that's the antenna that allows you to sort of tune into the radio station. So the consciousness is outside the body. It's different than the body. Body one is connected to consciousness one, or subsection of consciousness in the eternal or abstract or something, and that the brain is somehow doing something. Again, the question still exists here, right? How is the physical brain doing something to even interact with in a communicative way with the consciousness? But it's an interesting idea, right? So we put that in there. We can look at this a little bit longer because, we could just say it's all one mind, or we could say there's different subsections of mind, of consciousness, or whatever. But maybe the brain, that's like the material antenna that allows you to resonate properly with whatever consciousness belongs to the body. It's an interesting idea to consider. Okay. Agnostic interactionists. Okay, this is another group. I'm telling you, this is a battlefield with way more chaos than any of the other battlefields we've looked at so far. I mean, it's like going to a medieval battlefield and there's like 18 different armies and they're not that well coordinated with each other, and you're not sure who is whose enemy. It's an interesting field, right? The determinism free will one was very interesting because we knew where everybody was, and they're very interesting ideas, but hey, we could learn all of this and we could come in. On this one, it's more like, okay, this is a mess. There's a lot of things being said, and they don't even seem to be sharing a language with each other half the time. And what would count as an argument for one, it's not clear that the other person would think it's anything but babble. All right, so the agnostic interactionists, they content themselves with saying, okay, there's definitely a body and there's definitely a mind, and they're definitely very, very different. They really interact with each other. We've got enough evidence of that. It's very trivial to come up with straightforward examples in both directions. We've done it twice already today. Stick a needle in my arm, I have a mental experience of pain. Something physical, something of the body can affect the mental. Can push the mind into having an experience. Likewise, my mind can contemplate what it is that would be most fun to do, and I can think about what vacation to go on in 3 months with my wife, and we can look at pictures of places and fantasize about what it would be like and talk about it. And all of that obviously plays some role, or it seems to, at least. The agnostic interactionist would say, look, the mind makes decisions and the body does things based on those decisions. So there's clearly a two-way interactionism happening here. But then they say there's no way you're ever going to figure it out. I'm just agnostic. I don't know how. We don't know how. It's a weird mystery, and I'm not claiming to put forward an answer, but I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying clearly it happens. I'm just going to be the only person honest enough to admit we don't have a damn clue how that works. All right, so notice they're not pseudo-problemists. They're saying this is a real problem. They see the problem clearly. They agree completely with any other camp that sees the problem clearly, but they're saying, I'm not putting forward an answer. I'm just saying, can we at least remember that we know it works, right? Like we could get rid of the monist, the monistic materialist and the monistic idealist. We know there's these two things and we know they interact in both directions. So let's just say I don't yet know. I suspend my affirmation of a belief. Then there's the pseudo-problemists. And these are a very interesting group of people. We're going to look at least one essay from them. Because while everybody else on the battlefield is certain that there's a lot to fight about and to fight passionately about, and certain groups that one group might identify really need to get an axe to the head. Those are definitely the wrong guys. And we're fighting over something. The pseudo-problemists come in and say, well, we know more and more about what bodies do, right? So it used to be I stub my toe and then I have a mental experience of pain, but now we know the neuron and the synapse and the neuron and the synapse and the neuron and the synapse, and we've got this whole area of pain processing, perhaps, or message paths to an emotional core. All of these things are happening, and we understand this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And then the question supposedly is, well, when do those neurons bump into the thing that starts the dominoes of the mental happening? And they look at the problem, they say, well, every time we understand more and more what's happening, we just make that gap smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Why don't we just take it to its limit and realize there is no gap? There's just no gap between them that you would need to actually explain how does this material domino strike this mental thing. It's just, maybe it's like this thing's 100% material and now it's 90% material and 10% mental. And, like maybe it's just sort of, there's nothing there to explain. So that might not be clear why right now, but we'll look at an essay making that point. And, oh, good. That's the last slide. All right. Now, it may have occurred to anybody listening that they've got other theories for how the mind and the body are and how they interact with each other, or what the man is composed of and stuff like that. Obviously, none of these drawings that we've put together are supposed to be a total picture of anything. They're just the picture of trying to focus narrowly on this question of the mental and the physical and how could they possibly interact. But why don't we pause there? I wonder if I can pause the stream. I can't because it's a stream. Okay, good. So what I'll do instead is I'll shut up and I will go here and I will say, now that you've got a big burst of an introduction to the problem that we're going to be focusing on here, please take the mic. What are you thinking?
So I'm thinking that there are quite a lot of camps, and I truly wonder. I'm not an academic, obviously, but what I honestly and wholeheartedly wonder is why? Why are there so many camps?
Sure. That's a fair question. It's got a good answer, but it's a fair question.
Over the years, I've studied, researched, experienced various aspects, while meditating on ideas, trying to follow the noetic trails of various philosophers, whatever I could find as a valid, quote unquote, valid perspective online. I try to, to meditate, to follow along, and to see if through a noetic experience, as much as I could understand, comprehend, and acknowledge it with my being, if I could experience that as truth and reach that point of light, that it is similar to an aha moment, to a glorious cosmic wisdom sparkling through your mental sky. Well, now in 2024, since there has been so much research, scientific and not, meaning the Sivadian channeling, as you mentioned it. I have never heard it as Sivadian channeling before, but there are other titles roaming the web. But even that even for that kind of philosophy, of that kind of relation between mind and body, and consciousness and brain, and mind and body, there has been processes that are quite scientific as to reach a conclusion that is safe to disregard or safe to accept. Scientific methods with equipment, with processes, with principles, scientific methods, as without quotes. So I truly wonder if there are that many people upon the globe right now. Maybe the academics have a hard time on it. I don't know. But why so many camps, especially that
Yes.
things have evolved so much, and we have not only understood by getting our minds to grasp the notions, we have proven scientifically many aspects of consciousness and of mind, and primarily they are the field of spirituality, whether you see it as metaphysics or whether you see it as pure nature. But our lack of vision, of clear vision of what is truth, and I'm not being all platonic right now, we just cannot understand how much part of nature it is, and we call it metaphysics because it is on a level, on a plane, to better phrase it, that we cannot see, and we can only touch with our consciousnesses, with our psyches, and through experience as a being. And
Yes.
I will stop talking right now, but I do truly wonder why
No, that
there
is very
are
good. Okay, I have a couple of things I want to say and add to here. Let me go and pull up a picture here that might be helpful. Okay, good job. Thank you for that. Okay, couple of things. The question, why? Let's pull this back up here. Why 1,000 things and not 2 of them could possibly be right, and most of them or all of them could easily be wrong? What is with this giant library full of discussion and books and essays on this one little question? And then you quite rightly bring up the idea that, well, now hold on a second. There's an awful lot I know from my experience and from my attempts to get to truth. And, okay, so what the heck are we doing? Are we just like going to forget all of that and go back to some sort of, do we even have the ability to move our bodies with our minds? And it seems so unimportant. I think that's the gist of the question. And I have a couple of answers. The first thing is this: we as academics can separate questions. So the first thing we can do is say, well, why don't I, let's say that we're not going to say this is true for everybody, but let's imagine a person who has decided to approach academia to answer some of these questions, or just to explore it, just for the sake of exploring it and seeing where they can get through it. Who says, we're not going to say we have to agree with them. We're not going to say they could publish it in a paper to convince anybody else, but they're just saying, I personally have had direct knowledge of other minds. No, how about of God? Okay. Let's change the topic and just see an analogy in the does God exist stuff, because there's an awful lot of arguments there that we looked at before, right? Say, okay, somebody says, I personally have I've met God. I've seen him. I've experienced him. I know that that's real. Okay. Well, an academic could say, well, maybe it's real. Maybe it's a psychological thing, and maybe we could explain it away or something like that. But this person says, no, no, no. I understand what you're saying, but I'm telling you, if you come across something that's more real than anything, there's no doubt and there's no need to doubt. I'm telling you, I know something. Okay, well, what kind of knowledge is that? Well, that's certainly not the kind of knowledge that you could publish in a paper and convince anybody else to believe. And nobody else should believe it because of your report necessarily, right? Maybe your report in a theological term could be called a testimony, and maybe it could encourage somebody to go and try to find that themselves. But even in that context of a religious theological perspective, the point is for them to go and find it by themselves. The point isn't for them to sit by you and say, this person had an experience and I say it's true. Like, that would still be missing the point. So it's true both in academia and in theology in academia, but it's also true within the religious tradition or the mystical tradition, where it says, okay, well, the point of this is not that I had an experience and you believe me when I say it. That's just a cult. That's just idol worship. That's just, reducing things to doctrines. That's missing the point in both perspectives. However, a person who does feel like they've had that experience can then say, I bet you there's something I could learn from exploring these arguments, like maybe I could come to understand something meaningful and true about my experience by seeing all the ways that you can attack it and realizing how they don't work. Whereas if I just ignore them, then I know less about this experience, not in the way that matters, perhaps, not in the direct personal experience sort of way, which is, again, I'm not denying for this person or even for anybody that that's the thing of way more value, right? But could there be something of lesser value, but also of value in doing this nerdy stamp collecting kind of thing? I feel like that's the gist behind the question, and there's no insult taken in it, right? This is weird. This is weird that there's this many people with, and we've just barely done a little survey of all the types of possible answers people have to this sort of a question, how radically different they are from each other. And, why are they focusing narrowly on the mind and the body and the concepts that we have? Well, let's see what kind of, so the first thing I want to say is you can have that other thing and not feel like exploring this is a challenge to that, right? You could say, okay, yeah, I know that I have met the divine. And so the infinite has been given to me in a direct experience. Now let me go see what arguments there are for the existence of God and against it. You say, well, why would I do that? I already know God. It's like, well, okay, yeah, nobody's trying to take that away from you. You also can't give that to anybody. Even if you did learn all these arguments, you couldn't give it to anybody by your definition. But what you could do is maybe get something else of value. So let's decide what else of value could you possibly get? And why don't I try to share this picture here to see if this doesn't prime our intuitions a bit. What if the mountain of enlightenment was something that could be scaled in multiple different paths? What if enlightenment is like the peak of a mountaintop? You ever climb a mountain, you get these bloody knees and you've put so much effort into it and it's a lot of psychological stuff to overcome, but you get to the top and it's like all of that pain that was part of it is a part of why it's so freaking awesome to be at the top and to get that view. And it's like, okay, let's just say an analogy to the place of enlightenment is getting to the top of that mountain. And maybe there's a long, slow, gentle, difficult hiking trail that perhaps takes 250,000 years to get to the top of. Maybe the ancient mythopoetics have already, been wearing down that trail and figuring out how to get there that way. But then maybe on the other side of the mountain, it looks more like this. Maybe understanding how to get there propositionally or even scientifically is more like climbing over boulders. Or if it's scientific, maybe it's like screwing in a bolt and then having a tag team with a wire and making sure you're using peer review and you're kind of just making inch by inch by inch progress. But maybe if it is the ultimate truth, And there are ways of getting closer to the truth through argument and through considering other people's perspectives and through trying to justify what we instinctively think is true. And by sophisticating our views, maybe we can find another path to the same place. And the question is, well, if I've already been on that mountaintop, why do I want to go down to the bottom and walk up a different path that looks like it's pretty treacherous and difficult and might not even lead to the top? What would I get? Well, maybe you could prove it doesn't lead to the top, but you'd have to work really hard and do your best to get there if you're going to ever come close to showing that. But maybe there's value in knowing how to get there in other ways, right? So let's say there's a third path here that's not quite as steep, but it's like climbing over boulders. You know what I mean? It's like the philosophical, propositional, argumentative thing that we're doing here is it's systematic and it's difficult and it's bloody and it's hard. It's not as easy as just accepting the story that has wisdom and then you're in tune with it. And so you get to this place, or maybe there's another way to the top. Maybe, again, I don't advise this because personally, I don't think it's good for me chemically. And I don't advise it for anybody else because I've seen too many horrible examples. But I do know some very brilliant thinkers who take a helicopter ride to the top. According to their description, they take psychedelics and they somehow get up there. Again, Nietzsche said, beware of wisdom you haven't earned. I think Jung said that, but Nietzsche said, if you ride a horse to the top of the mountain and then you jump off the horse and you find your legs are too weak to stand, that would be a bad thing. I would say that's very dangerous, but there are people who report that that's the way they get there. I have no idea. I'm certainly not endorsing it. It sounds extremely dangerous for real serious reasons. However, it doesn't matter. The point is, there's a different kind of value in understanding the path, right? If there's a lot of lost people, there's clearly a lot of lost people because all except one or maybe all of these views are completely mistaken. There's a lot of people that are stuck at different boulders and they can't see how to climb above them. And maybe if you have the wisdom of getting up there already, you can then take on the heavy burden of saying, okay, yeah, but that doesn't mean anything if I just tell it to people. And if some people, maybe it's some people's destiny to climb this other path. And if I come and learn how to play that game properly, maybe I've got an extra leg up because I sort of know where it's leading. And so there's that benefit, right? Say, okay, maybe I know where it's leading more or less, but knowing how to get there on this more difficult path would be worth something, possibly. The other possibility is that there might be many qualities of the experiential, direct, experimental, like, I don't know if it's, I spent 30 years in a cave meditating, or, whatever it is that different religious traditions or meditative traditions do to try to get to those types of understandings. And you had mentioned science too, so we'll go back to that. But there are all sorts of confusions that can easily be made because you are not subjecting what it is you think about that enlightenment to the criticism of other perspectives. So, for instance, we could imagine a person who God, like a giant, picked them up and just deposited them on top of the mountain. And they're up there and they're like, whoa, Moses, Buddha, Jesus in the lotus position, all drinking tea together. This is some wild thing up here. And it's like I'm having an experiential realization of that enlightenment. And I'm not denying that. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm mocking it. I think that's probably most likely the case, that non-academic people are going to be up there first because they're going to take other paths. But when you do take those paths, often you forget that the way you conceptualize those truths, once you start putting them into words, have you ever listened to like a person who says, I took psychedelics and I understood the oneness of everything, but then as soon as I tried to put it into words, as soon as I started to come down, it's like it escaped from me and I lost it. It's like there's something wrong about my words, or maybe words inherently are wrong because they can't wrap themselves around the thing because that's what words want to do, but it's not that kind of thing. Well, whatever it is, if you think you've got words, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want to add something,
please,
because it is exactly what you mentioned previously as words of Nietzsche, I think, that, or Jung, that it is a bit dangerous to reach a wisdom that you have not yet earned. So you might drink up, or however, anyway, get yourself on psychedelics and reach a realm of consciousness that your reality that you haven't yet reached by walking noetically, intellectually, mentally, and spiritually. And you might experience something, but you will definitely be, how to say it, you won't be able to articulate it. In Platonic terms, it means that you took psychedelics, you reached somehow, or it might be an illusion or a delusion, subconscious delusion, a projection of your subconscious, of your most inner, deepest, soul fulfilling need, and you project that. But in Platonic terms, it means that you might have managed to reach the realm of forms and ideas, which is the realm of noimosini, but you never climbed up from experience to logic to dhyania. Your dhyania, which is, it can be translated to conscious intellect, it is untrained. It's in kindergarten. So whatever your noimosini received, whatever you experienced, whatever your noimosini grasped, you cannot articulate it. You cannot filter it through your dhyania, and
Perfect.
phrase it. That was that.
No, that was the other half of the point. That's perfect. Let's go to this next slide then, and let me show you that, because that's the other point. So there's a danger in both directions, right? The first danger is, all I care about are the arguments and the words. And if I've got the words right and I'm affirming the right thing and you can't knock down my argument, then I've got the best idea, right? Yeah, but you didn't experience it, right? Like, you don't know it like Adam knew his wife. You just sort of know how to talk about it. And if that's all you have, you missed everything. On the other hand, the other danger is, I had the experience. Now, whenever I talk about it, I'm right. No, you're not, because you have to go submit your talking about it to the people who are playing the game of, how do we talk properly about things? That's all philosophy is saying, these are the rules of right thinking. Okay. So if you think you've got propositional truths out of your experience, how do you know they're true? The experience is still true. And it might be true that that experience matters more and the truth of it matters more than just the statement. That's still true. But you could easily make the error of then talking about it as if you've comprehended it, but really you comprehended it through the historical lens of your particular cultural background or whatever. And that's all fine. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. But how do you know that the statements, the propositions you're putting forward about it are correct? I don't think you can know just from the experiential. That's a different game. So what we could do is we could share this image again that I like to share a lot, as I think it makes this point well. So I put this together and said, okay, imagine concentric circles, and there's a big pillar in the middle. I got to make them not look like spheres by getting rid of those other lines. But the big pillar in the middle, maybe that's the scientific. I've got it so figured out. I have formulaic descriptions of it. It's like, well, we're not quite there yet. We don't have formulaic descriptions of units of enlightenment or something like that, for sure. Might be an absurd idea to look for that, but we're certainly don't have that. But then in the philosophic, in the realm of right speaking and arguing, am I speaking about it in the way that's universally true, or am I stuck within a thing that, it may as well be a lie, even though it's true for me because it's pointing to my experience, it's untrue for everyone who hears it. So while I'm trying to tell the truth, I'm telling lies. I mean, that's not a good thing. Now, again, if you stick to saying nothing more than, I will be a manifestation of the embodied reality or something, then you don't have to worry about that. But if you want to talk, if you want to speak about it with propositional statements, even remembering that those statements aren't a replacement for that higher thing, they can only help clarify your ideas perhaps, or point towards it or something. But if you want to speak about it and you want to speak about it properly, you're going to have to accept that you're in the realm of the people who are playing all these games and having all these different camps and saying, okay, convince us. Show us how this view is wrong. Show us how that view is wrong. Show us why your view answers the things that those views don't answer. And to play that game is to engage with this philosophic. Now, outside of that is this realm of non-lyrical symphonic music and painting and poetry and sculpture and architecture and narrative, right? That's where you can maybe more immediately feel the thing, right? Where maybe that's the language that can really point you towards it because there's something of the thing within them, right? That might be a better language for getting there, right? I'm not denying any of that, right? I'm not saying the philosophic is the be all and end all. I'm saying, no, it's nested in something else. And it seems like there's an easier way to get there than the philosophic, but that doesn't mean that there isn't potentially value either in getting our propositions correct or as close to correct as they can be, or in recognizing that they never will be correct. Either way, we'd have to play the philosophic game to come to either of those conclusions. And we can assert those conclusions, right? We could assert the conclusion that, hey, the philosophers are wasting their time. Like, just go and find God and find ultimate reality and take your psychedelics, whatever it is, just go do that. And then you'll have it and you won't be arguing anymore and you won't be worried about having it anymore. Maybe that's correct, but that's a propositional statement. So now you're in the realm of the philosophers. You have to make the argument that that's correct, or you can just walk away from it, right? You can just say, well, I've decided philosophy is a waste of time, and you could be right about that. I'm not saying you're wrong. But if you want to convince us that you're wrong, you're going to have to play this game, because this is the game we're playing over here. And it's possible that there's an awful lot of value that one could get out of playing this game. Even if it doesn't, I think it does lead to the same ultimate conclusions, or it, I think the philosophic radically points at it, and it inescapably radically points at it with the greatest thinkers in the history of the narrative of the philosophic conversation. And when we've looked a lot at Socrates, and we've looked a lot at great thinkers in the past in some other courses, so we won't go into that. I mean, we're not starting this mind-body thing with Socrates talking about the nature of the soul on the day of his death with his friends, because we've already covered that. But it's possible that the philosophic, if it can't get you there, it can get you right up to that top ledge and point you in that direction. And if it can, well, then why don't we help clarify the path so that, you know, hey, this monistic idealism is wrong. That's Socrates, by the way. This monistic materialism is wrong. And I'm giving you arguments and showing you how this idea works and that idea doesn't work. That's playing the game of philosophy. One, it could help the other philosophers. Two, it could help you to the degree that you care to be philosophical. But three, I think it's inescapable that if you want to do more than just have and be the truth, which what could be more than that? It might be the wise thing is to just have and be the truth and forget about all this philosophy. That could be the case. But if you want to talk about it, this is the game. You have to play this game. You have to enter this battlefield, and it's a very confused battlefield, more confused than the determinism free will battlefield. I mean, there's philosophical battlefields that are less confused than this, but by looking at our summary here, it's like, well, this one has a lot of views. They don't seem to have anything to do with each other. The very nature of what they think body and mind are is often different. The types of arguments that might appeal to one or the other are not very clear. It's not clear that there is a problem, that we know what the problem is. Most everybody thinks they do. You know, I mean, it's like there's a lot of confusion in this field. You could benefit the field if you could bring some clarity, and perhaps you're in a privileged position to do that. If you say, look, there's a way to get to these answers that's outside of this. Well, that might help you to guide you along the way. But also, the other side of the coin that I think is probably worth stressing is that usually when people have a revelatory experience of any kind, they think they understand it in a propositional form, and they don't. They meet God and they immediately turn him into an idol. They meet him and they turn the idea into a cliche. And then they try to tell everybody else they have to affirm it's true in that way. Or they just meet the idol and think that that is the thing. And it's like, okay, those are in the realm of propositional statements where you think you know, if you have an idol, you kind of own it. You know what I mean? So the analogy is that if you're speaking about these ultimate truths as if the words you're using are the correct one and don't need any further revision, rather than grasping and pointing at things, then you're in the philosophical game, whether you like it or not. And if you want to go around saying, here's how it works, you've got this and you've got that, and here's the term for this, and here's how it interacts with that, you're in a realm of people who are a bunch of nerdy stamp collectors who have put a lot of thought into this. And if you don't know what they're thinking and how to address their objections and incorporate the germs of truth that they have, which, by the way, they have insights. I mean, you can gain a lot of insights if you're concerned with speaking properly about it. All they're concerned with is speaking properly about it. And obviously, they can't all be right. At most, one of them could be right, and probably none of them. But that doesn't mean that they're not gaining insights and saying, hey, you guys over there, you think you got it all figured out, but you're forgetting about this thing. You're forgetting about why it's like something to see green. You're forgetting about the fact that the only explanatory power comes from an objectivist materialist assumption, right? I'm not saying any of these things are right, but they're bringing up these things to challenge each other. And the philosophical conversation is the acceptance of that challenge. And you can sophisticate your own views, you can sharpen them, you can clarify them, and you can become more persuasive, and you can understand why it is that people are confused. If they actually are confused, you can gain things from them. So this is my long answer for why would we do this at all if we could just have the truth rather than debate about it. So that's my suggestion. And I'm not sure that it's true that anybody should give a damn about philosophy. I'm not sure that you shouldn't just go be the truth, and that's good enough. But it seems like if you can be the truth, you should be able to be the truth within a philosophical setting also, right? What, you're going to go be the truth with the lame and the hungry. You're going to go be the truth with the cultists at the local shrine. You're going to go be the truth with your friends when you're talking about love and the importance of life. Can you be the truth in an academic setting too? It sounds like a challenge, but it seems worthwhile. It seems potentially worthwhile for that number of reasons that I briefly tried to buckshot out at you. So what do you think about that?
I agree with you on everything, and I most certainly stand by for me, it is a fact. Philosophy is a science of the mind. So whatever ideas, whatever noetic we wish to reach or to comprehend or to understand or to even experience, to reach the point of experiencing it, we must dilute it, we must distill it, we must coagulate, we must process it and put it through every possible method and trails that we can possibly find. Philosophy and the various camps are a great tool to do so. And what you said, that there will be insights or reminders that will either help you to clarify your experience, to clarify your perspective, to weed out, maybe that's a better word, that's a better phrasing, to weed out your perspective from from falsehoods or from misconceptions, because experience is tricky. It can be tricky. It can get you blindfolded, So
it might be the
if you-
ultimate real, but yeah, if we're talking
Yes.
about it, we're always wrong somehow, right? Like there's always a disconnect there. So it's unfortunate that we agree about everything, because we're here to do philosophy, and that means we should be disagreeing. So I'm going to have to change my position now that you agree, or we'll have to move on to something else we can disagree with. But I think that's very beautifully said, what you just said, and I think that's correct. We should be, there's only two possibilities. If we think we've had a revelatory experiential enlightenment, either we're wrong and we'll discover that we're wrong through our philosophical investigation. That sounds horrible. Or we're right, in which case the philosophical investigations might cause us to doubt that we're right for a little while. But if we're really right, that we couldn't doubt. Like, if you're really right that you've had it, well, maybe you didn't have it. Maybe you had an approximation of it. So either or a misfire. Either we will come to realize we didn't have it, but we still could, or we will realize we have it, and there's no challenge that can come from philosophy that would make us lose that infinite prize. We could just use the fact of it to help guide us with wisdom to see through the arguments and say, wow, man, that's a really strong argument against everything that I know is true from my experience. So let me start doing the work of trying to figure out what could possibly be wrong about what you just said, because there's got to be something. And then when we find that thing, that's the thing that really matters for where you are, since you came up with that argument. And for me, I didn't know. If I don't have the answer already, then that's less knowledge I have about this thing. So if your original question was, well, there's ways to get there, why are we stamp collecting on some tiny little definition of the concepts of mind and body and trying to work out this problem? I don't see that we should. What we should be afraid of is not having the truth. And if we are afraid of philosophy, maybe that's a sign that we suspect we don't actually have it. If we want philosophy, maybe that's a sign that we don't have it, but we really want it, in which case it's a good sign we're going to get it. If we do have it, then there's no threat from philosophy. Philosophy just becomes a really fun and potentially valuable, for a large number of reasons, path that we can take to add to be able to add to this thing of infinite value, right? You're going to add to that. Well, I can now at least talk about it less stupidly, or more clearly, or persuasively, or I can at least sort out, that idea of mine was confused, so this thing must be different than the way I tried to word it originally, and sophisticate our ability to conceptualize it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to stop the recording all right. So one more time to recap, and thank you again, Alana, for that. That was really good. What we're going to do is we're going to end the recording and start a new one, because what we're going to do on Mondays is an extra long session to get through this intro to philosophy of mind faster. So this is our first Monday. We just did the intro, part of the intro to the intro. Now we're going to get into our first essay, and we're going to read it, and we're going to discuss it. It's going to be from one of these perspectives. Oops, let me add that back in. It's going to be from one of these many perspectives, about how the mind and body could possibly interact with each other. And so we'll start a second class with that. We're going to be doing extra long sessions on Monday. We'll be starting at the same time, but doing a regular size session on Wednesdays. And we're going to get through this in a month or so. And then we'll be ready to go into the full philosophy of mind course, which is, of course, concerned with more than just this mind-body problem. It's concerned with AI and behavioralism, and there's all sorts of different things that course is concerned with. But what we're going to do is micro focus and laser focus on this one question of, the mind seems like a certain concept, the body seems like a different concept. How could it be that they could affect each other in either direction? So we'll end this here. We'll have a little bit of a break and some after talk together, and then we'll start the next one.